So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session, Better Science for Future Us. And the subtitle is Planning for the Year of Open Science, which is something that's in the works for 2023. We are recording and we have transcripts going. You can click on the bottom of your screen for transcripts. And we're really excited to be here. Openscapes is an initiative to help researchers do better science in less time together. And through our mentorship program, we help research teams develop habits for data-intensive science that's more open, reproducible, and collaborative. Just a reminder that participating in this session, you agree to adhere to ESIP's community participation guidelines. And before we jump in, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm grateful for the land where I am here in Frisco, Colorado. I recognize the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute tribes that have made and continue to make significant contributions to our understanding of the world and stewardship of this place. And in particular, at AGU in a session, Open Science for Equitable Climate Action, Lydia Jennings reminded us in her presentation that Indigenous people are data experts. And through this acknowledgement, I want to make steps towards building relationships between Western and Indigenous research paradigms. So our plan for today is to start with this goal of our session, which is to increase the visibility and value of open science within government and support researchers and leaders that are already doing that within government organizations. We're going to hear from a set of different speakers about open science in both NASA and NOAA and California EPA and others, as well as then have a discussion about how this works and questions that you may have. So we'll do this in a fishbowl style with 10-minute presentations, and then we'll have questions and comments from broader discussion towards the end. We'll also monitor the chat throughout, so please feel free to put questions, comments in the chat, and also contribute to this document. We're big fans of Google Docking and live Google Docking together, and so if you have resources or ideas, please add them to the notes. With that, I will turn it over to Julie Lowndes, who's the founder and co-director of Openscapes with me.
Great, thanks, Erin, and hi everyone. We're so happy to have you all here, and this is such a great start to Friday, the last day of ESIP. So thanks so much all for being here. What I'd like to do now is to introduce the speakers that will present in our session today, and it's just an absolute pleasure to introduce all of them. Something Erin and I say is that we just have the coolest job that we get to work with so many awesome researchers and folks supporting researchers and help us all do a little bit better using technology and other workflow practices. So I'll start off by introducing Ileana Fenwick, and I don't know if you're there, I can't see you, but you can give a little wave. Hi. So Ileana is a second-year PhD student and an NSF graduate research fellow in the Earth, Marine, and Environmental Sciences program at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she's focused on evaluating marine community responses to climate change and human impacts to improve our management outcomes. Ileana is also a fierce advocate of historically Black colleges and universities and engagement in diversity in marine science at UNC and the broader scientific community through her consulting firm. And Ileana has been involved with Openscapes since 2021. She was a participant in one of our Champions programs with researchers, and you'll hear more about that soon. And now she is developing a pathways to Openscapes for HBCUs. And next, we've got Eli Holmes. If you want to give a wave, Eli. Eli is a senior fishery scientist at NOAA at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center in the Mathematical Biology and Systems Monitoring Program. And Eli has been an advocate for open science for a long time and teaches many different R and GitHub workshops within the Fisheries Science Center. She's also been a part of the Openscapes team since 2021. She participated in a cohort in the spring and then helped co-lead an additional one in the fall that included folks from 4 different centers. And then she also has participated in one of our NASA efforts through the Cloud Hackathon that you'll hear about more soon too. Anna Holder is our next speaker to introduce. Hi, Anna. Anna is an environmental scientist at California Water Board's Office of Marine Information Management and Analysis and Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program. She's involved with building data communities within and outside of the water boards, and was the lead staff for developing and implementing the water board's College of Water Informatics. And together with her colleague, Corey Clatterbuck, who is a Sea Grant Fellow, last year, the two of them assisted Fall Camp Champions cohorts as a way to learn how to lead their own, which they'll be doing later this year. Amy Steiker is our next speaker to introduce. Hi, Amy. She is at NSIDC, the National Center for Ice. Oh man, somebody help me out.
Snow and Ice Data Center.
National Snow and Ice Data Center.
Oh man, thank you. Distributed Active Archive Center. And she is a data services engineer specializing in the development and management of data education resources, tools, and services for NSIDC and their growing user community, as well as data transformation service development for NASA Estes. Thank you. And Amy and her colleague Erin, who I'll introduce next, have been part of our NASA Openscapes mentor cohort, and we've been collaborating with them throughout 2021 as they prepare to help researchers transition their workflows to the cloud. So Erin Fries, who is part of this effort with Amy, hi Erin, is a science coordinator lead at NASA's Land Processes Distributed Active Archive Center, the LPDAC. And in this role, Erin provides user needs, insights, and technical support for archive and distribution, service development, and outreach activities, including developing tutorials, scripts, and presentations. So we're really excited to hear from all of you as we go forward. Great. Well, shifting gears then, we're going to first kick off with just an introduction to Openscapes. And so if you're following along on the notes, we're towards the bottom of page 4, and the slides that we'll show are all linked from this doc. So I wanted to give a brief introduction to Openscapes, our kind of ethos and vision, what we're doing with Openscapes. So we really think about the open science and open data science. We think of this all as a movement and as a whole ecosystem and landscape. So what we see is our role is helping researchers transition from kind of the sad, lonely individual research, like these animals in the bottom left, and towards finding their teams and their communities and seeing not only the landscape, but existing pathways forward within that landscape. And so we play a role in helping welcome folks to this landscape and help them identify those existing pathways and travel on them safely, while also meeting others, helping others along, and contributing to new paths as needed. So, so our approach is really research-centered and focused on teams, and really trying to help folks transition from the idea that science is something you do alone and that you have to build from scratch, and towards something that you can do with others and that you can reuse and build from. So what we focus on is creating space for folks to talk about their needs and to learn with others, and also create place for them to explore and learn together. So we do this through a variety of facilitated practices, through cohort calls and things we call seaside chats and co-working times, as well as having other technologies. And we were really interested in cultivating real relationships and real connections as folks transition to these new ways of working and keep up with them. So we really are focused on this idea of welcoming folks and empowering them, and focusing on kinder science. And something that we are learning all the time is that it is a learning process, something that we're learning and iterating and doing this openly. And it's something that takes time and is it means sharing imperfect work. It means that things can be messy, but it's a journey and a pathway that we're all on together. So the Champions program, which we'll hear about throughout the day today, is a program that it's a mentorship program for research teams. And it's something that we designed to complement and synergize with other existing efforts that are in this landscape. So the structure of this program is based on Mozilla Open Leaders. So the idea of reusing something that already works. This is something that is cohort-based, remote-based, centers diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it also lets folks bring their own project to their work, to this work. We introduced the idea of working as teams and research teams, and have a core curriculum that is centered around open data science and also kinder science. And these recurring themes we're seeing is that folks are creating place and space, focusing on the common, reusing existing, and then contributing to fill gaps and doing so openly. So Erin, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks. So when Julia and I started working together, one of the things that was, I think, clear was that the Openscapes, the Champions program that she's created, is designed so that teams can do any kind of transition towards open science that they want. And so we started collaborating with NASA really with 3 goals to help researchers transition to using NASA data on the cloud. So that was a more specific, narrowed transition than just open science in general. And within that project, we have 3 goals. One is to develop this cross-stack mentor community to identify the places and spaces that are common around using cloud data, NASA cloud data together, and then letting the DACs differentiate where it makes sense for them. And so that's one of the exciting things we're going to hear about from Amy and Erin. We then wanted to work with the DAC mentors to empower science teams through the Champions program. So the curriculum and the program, what Julie just described, we're then taking and we're modifying it slightly to focus on transitioning your workflows to the cloud. But we're not losing the open kinder science part of that as well. So it's really, how do we help these teams make the shift as a technical shift to the cloud, but also to embrace open science. And then finally, we have this idea that through this NASA project that we can grow beyond Julie and me to having this be part of people's jobs. And so that's where the Scaling Openscapes Champions with the DAC mentors, we've been really excited that the DAC mentors and that the DAC management and leadership, and actually leadership all the way up to Kevin Murphy, have been really supportive at seeing people's jobs shift to include this kind of connection with research teams to support these transitions. Next slide. And so it's where I think lots of times we focus on the tooling and what people need for the tooling. And what Openscapes does is it connects and closes this feedback loop between the tooling and the teams of users. And so we see that when the teams feel more competent, they're excited to continue to expand and invest in their practices. And then it grows, it evolves back into doing better science for future us and more efficient and kinder science. Next slide. And to just kind of wrap this all up, this is a flywheel. It's a concept from Jim Collins, and it's something that we've been using to think with, and it's an imperfect project. And so where Julie started was really in transforming her own team to kinder open science workflows. She was giving talks and inspiring the scientific community, and that led to developing the Champions program in its first iteration and attracting teams and delivering it. And so then we had this first set of teams in 2019 that had gone through this whole process. And so then Julie gave a talk at ESIP, and that's where we connected in July of 2020, where we then have are growing this mentor program, both with me as a mentor, with Ileana and Eli and Anna, also as additional mentors. So we're really in that space wanting to grow the leadership skills and the teaching capacity and the confidence of people who are in this bridging space between open science and open data and data management and the research teams. And then with the NASA group in particular, and we've seen this a couple of times in other cohorts we've run too, investing in the curriculum that we actually teach, and then offering up these cohorts with the research teams, and then having these research teams make these changes. And the thing that I'll close with is just that unlike a workshop or a hackathon where you have just a sort of a short, intense period of time, the Champions model is a 2.5 month, 1.5 hour every other week model. And it really kind of puts agency with the teams to make the choice of what they're going to do with their team. And it's been really remarkable for us to see how that actually is transforming behavior of the teams, instead of, like I have a lot of, I've learned a lot of things from a workshop, but I haven't applied it to my own work. So the application here has been really interesting.
Thanks, Erin. And Ileana, we'll pass it over to you.
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Ileana, and I wanted to just take a few moments to discuss briefly kind of how I became a product of the Openscapes program and system, and how that's inspired the ongoing collaboration that we have right now to build up equity in the open science space. So I am a PhD student at UNC Chapel Hill, and I joined a quantitative fisheries ecology lab, which is just a really fancy way of saying that we're using tons of data to try to understand how communities are responding to climate change. Excuse me. And so joining this lab, I had to onboard completely in a pandemic, which, as you can imagine, was extremely difficult. I was working with data sets that were 50, 60 years old, hundreds of thousands of data points. And I spent months of my time just parsing through the data, trying to understand what I was looking at. And then eventually we ended up becoming members of the championships program through Openscapes. And I remember being exposed to this open science kind of framework and these tools, and my mind was just completely blown, because I very much so resonated with the kind of like lonely animal in the corner who was just like going through data for months and months and months at a time, and really struggling with like having a collaborative and inclusive workflow with others. And so after participating in Openscapes, it radically transformed the way that I do my work, the way that my lab members have been doing my work as well. And as Julie briefly mentioned kind of in my introduction, I'm a product of a historically Black college university, Hefty University. And so when I had finished the Openscapes program and I learned about all of these amazing tools that open science has to offer, I sat back and I said, why had I never heard any of this before? Why did no one ever like tell me anything about open science before I had ended up in the Openscapes program? And so that has opened the door for where we're hoping this collaboration will go, in addressing this lack of equity and sharing these amazing resources that build better, more accessible collaborative science. And so our current work is addressing these accessibility issues and building a program through Openscapes where HBCUs have the opportunity to get access to this information, receive the support and aftercare to implement these techniques effectively into their workflows. And we're really excited about where we'll go from here. Just continuing to get at this open science and continuing to share that information through the lens of equity, and continuing to make this field more accessible for everyone. So I'm really excited. And Openscapes in the championships program has played a huge role in that. So we can talk about it more, I guess, towards the end, but that is my brief spiel about that. And we're very excited. Yeah.
Thanks, Ileana. And thanks so much for being here. Wonderful. Well, we will transition to our next speaker then. And so this is Eli Holmes from NOAA Fisheries. We're at the top of page 5 of the Google Doc, and I will get your slides up, Eli.
All right. Well, I'm really glad to be here and chatting with everyone. And I used this opportunity to think about how how open science has been spreading in my agency. I'm with NOAA Fisheries, and to plan for 2023, when we are trying to get a much larger NIMS Openscape Mentors program. When I say NIMS, I'm talking about acronyms. That is short for National Marine Fisheries Service and is our acronym for NOAA Fisheries, which you would never guess. Okay, so next slide. So first thing before I start, I should tell you a little bit about me. So just kind of put things in perspective. I'm a research scientist. My major activity is research. I've been at NOAA Fisheries for many years. I am in a leadership position, but a leadership among scientists. I'm not a supervisor. I'm definitely not up in the leadership of NOAA at my center or nationwide. Although I do, as I said, I have a leadership role in terms of spreading open science at NOAA Fisheries. I'm definitely an early adopter of open science. And I would say I'm probably the point person now for these efforts across NOAA Fisheries at the moment. I also teach a lot. I teach within NOAA Fisheries, and I'm also affiliate faculty at University of Washington. And I teach time series analysis. And this latter point is really important because, next slide. Oh, next slide. I'm going to go back and forth a little. Okay, never mind. Go back. Sorry. Okay, great. And this is a really important point that I'm an affiliate faculty because science has changed, and the way that we do statistics has really changed. And open science is very fundamental to that, and it's a very big part of how we teach graduate students. So it's something I think a lot about in terms of helping scientific staff at NOAA Fisheries. Next slide. So NOAA Fisheries, it's a really big agency, and it's divided into a science and a policy segment. So the policy people come up with policies, and our science centers support that. So science centers are really focused on science, and I'm at a science center. I'm at Northwest Fisheries Science Center over there on the West Coast in Seattle. And there are other science centers around the country. Next slide. And I'm not really going to talk much about the mentor program, but I am talking about planning for the mentor program. And the things to know about this is, it's coming out of the Openscapes program that we are involved in 2021, but it's part of a longer trajectory of supporting open science. And you can go to our GitHub page here and read about it. But the key thing to note about this, understand about this, and this is going to be different than the NASA Openscapes, is that our effort is grassroots. It is coming from below. It is not something that's coming top down. So this is individual scientists who are doing this change because we have to. Science has changed. How we do science has changed. Okay, next slide. Okay, so given that it's a grassroots, and the question for me was like, okay, what do we need to do now? So we're pretty well, our mentor program is going well, but the question is, of all the many things we could be doing, what should we be doing this year in preparation for the year of open science, which is next year? So next slide. So I decided to use this opportunity to think about the diffusion of innovations theory to help me plan and think about what are the next steps. And I really had two very concrete questions. Where should we be putting our energy? And then secondly, how should we talk to leadership I'm just going to, given the time, I'm just going to talk about the first one, but I did in my slides, I do have some slides on my thinking about the next question. Next slide. So there's a little cartoon, diffusion of innovation theory, and the theory, so in studying E.M. Rogers and developing this theory, studying how innovation spreads within populations, and an organization is a population, and it found that it follows this predictable pattern of how it spreads in different types of people in the community. So it starts with the innovators, they just kind of have the idea, but then the next people who take it up are the early adopters. And they are really different. They hear that idea and they're like, whoa, how did I never see this before? So when you were listening to Ileana, classic early adopter person, they hear it, they can see the benefit, and they're like, wow, mind blown, I am going to put effort into this. So those are your early adopters, and they're really critical in the early part. And then the next group is the early majority, then the late majority. So those are your majority people, and they're different, and their concerns are different. They may be open to it, but they're pretty different than those early adopters. So there's this kind of trajectory that happens. Next slide. And one of the key ideas is that there is this tipping point that when you reach about 15% of the population reached, that the idea can really start spreading. And this is coming from network theory. If you look at the spread of anything within networks where you have clustering, when it first starts spreading, things just kind of like, they don't get beyond the clusters. But then once you have enough penetration and you get connections across clusters, ideas just spread. So that's this tipping point idea. Next slide. So the message from this is really critical to really reach those early adopters and get really good penetration in that early adopter population. That is absolutely essential to reach them before you start working at reaching the next group. Next slide. So what are the characteristics of these early adopters? I mean, I think you just listened to what Ileana was saying, how she described it. Man, they hear the idea, wow, they can go with it. So that's really great, and they have lots of energy, but there's some big challenges. They're isolated, and often they're actually not in leadership positions because of the nature of their personalities. Actually, it's kind of interesting. They're just not the sort of people who might be really high up in leadership. That was really interesting for me to discover in reading this theory. So next slide. Okay, just jump this. So it's really important to try to figure out where you're at. And I did thinking about this. I would say we're in the early part of the early adopters. So next slide. So question, where should we put our energy? And that is got to be for 2022 is identifying, supporting, and developing these early adopters. Next slide. Okay, so think about these science centers. Next slide. I'm going to wrap it up soon, Julie. Okay, next slide. So this is the situation that we have is that, nope, previous one. So imagine these circles are science centers, and we have these people who are early adopters, and they're really hard to reach. And within a federal agency, it's not like I have any ability to contact these people. I mean, I literally have no way to communicate across science centers. There's just something that is not possible. Like maybe from the top, but this is happening grassroots, and it just can't happen. And so the key thing is figuring out how to break down, how to get the communication lines. I think for us, for the grassroots, that's really important. And I'm going to just quickly go through the last 3 slides, Julie, talk just
That's fine.
a little bit about this. Go ahead, next slide.
You can, yeah, take a little time. That's fine.
Okay, next slide. So those communication lines are really important. Yeah, this is a good slide to be on. And for a long time, like we were just completely siloed. We could not, I just can't communicate, even though I teach a lot in the agency, I just don't, there's no way for me to communicate across centers. There's no way for me to find even the R users. I'm a R programmer and I teach R, but it's just no way. But there's some things that happened that changed that. And one was there was a stock assessment group, and they began working together across science centers, and they developed an email list. And that had connections across centers of people who were doing open source programming. And it just happened to be what was important to this stock assessment group. I was tied into that initiative it's kind of unrelated, but it's this toolbox initiative. But the thing was, there was an email list, and that was the first time I had ability to begin getting into these isolated communities. And then in 2021, I was able to leverage that email list. And once I was able to get into these isolated clusters, getting my training out to people, and then that started piling on, then it became, in the Openscapes was totally related to that, in that the fall, we were able for the first time to get a cohort across the centers. So like breaking down these clusterings it's a really hard thing to do. And so the fall happened, and then this is kind of really interesting. I realized when I tracked this back, another huge change happened when Julie made a GitHub org for NASA Openscapes, and it was public. And I'm really deep into GitHub, and I was into Openscapes, and I discovered what she had made. And I read every bit of that. And I read that, and that was the moment I realized, whoa, this is a game changer. Because now I have something to point to my upper leadership. And I can say, hey, NASA's doing this. And they were doing it top down. So that was just like, oh, bonanza. And that was like that moment. And this gives you a concrete example of how like sharing something, opening up the community, sharing what you're creating allows others to grab that and like just build on it. And so that, so Julie making just that GitHub org, and then them, which means people putting their stuff out in the open. So the NASA mentors putting their stuff out in the open and making that discoverable, then allowed us to organize in our agency across centers and say, hey, we can sort of leverage that and begin developing our own mentor program. All right, I'm going to stop there. We can talk more about it later.
So Eli, while we're transitioning to Anna, there's a lot going on in the chat too that would be great for you to, if you have time to just take a quick scroll.
Yeah, sure. I was not.
Thanks. No, you know, why? How could you do the chat and talk? But thanks.
Thanks so much, Eli. And
the chat here. Oops, no, where's the chat? Oh, here's the chat. Cool.
Great. And there's some, we've been pasting some of that in the note stock as well. So there's a couple places to look.
Yeah, so should I just address some of these? How do you want for timing?
Let's keep going and just address in the chat, Eli.
Okay,
but then we'll come back to things that are relevant for conversation at the end. Sorry.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. So we'll transition to Anna Holder at the California EPA Water Boards, and we're at the bottom of page 5 in the notes. So take it away, Anna. Thanks.
Hi, y'all. Before I dive into my presentation, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the many tribal lands in California and express my deep gratitude for the ancestral and native homelands where I am in Sacramento. The local tribes who have been and continue to be stewards of these lands and waters include the Nisenan, Maidu, and Nuak peoples, and the Putwin and Wintun nations. And I'm also a tribal coordinator in the work that I do. And so that acknowledgement and honoring those peoples and working with those peoples is a key part of the work that I do with the water boards, which is actually made up of 10 different agencies in California. And so there's 9 regional boards. You can see the regions in the map here, and 1 state board, which is where I am in Sacramento. And I'm sure there are a lot of other agency, local to federal agency folks here. And so that, we're one big happy family with different ideas about how things should go sometimes. And the duties include monitoring water quality, water rights, drinking water, and then funding and fiscal administration. And so just like for the drinking water example, there's over 7,500 systems. As you can imagine, this results in a huge complex data infrastructure, which I like to refer to as kindly as our big spaghetti monster. So there's lots of things. Some of them are connected, some of them are not. Sometimes we use the same language and controlled vocabulary. Sometimes we don't, which makes doing open science really difficult. I am in the California Water Board's Office of Information Management and Analysis, which is a huge mouthful, or OIMA as we call ourselves. And we are charged with making data open and accessible through legislation, I think in 2016, AB 1755. We also have another kind of like arm of the office is conducting monitoring and data management for surface waters in California. So SWAMP is the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program. So we're a little bit swampy. We also do a lot with community and tribal engagement, data engagement, which means we have a ton of partnerships. OIMA itself is a non-regulatory part of the agency, so that gives us a little more flexibility to partner with different folks and do some really awesome data things together. And we're always looking for new partnerships. So if you want to do water work in California, let us know. We've been on an open data journey specifically since a little bit before 2016. So that's the AB 1755 that I mentioned. On the state stuff that's been happening, there's a California water resiliency portfolio that came out in 2019 and 2020, and a state data strategy. Within the water boards themselves, state board adopted an open data resolution, which is specific to data but has similar open science principles in it. OIMA developed a strategic data action plan to figure out how we're going to implement and operationalize the principles of the open data resolution. And we've been doing a lot since then. So we have a data literacy strategy. Julie mentioned the College of Water Informatics, which is it's kind of like the mechanism that we're trying to use to get data related resources out to the folks within the water boards, all agencies and our partners. And in 2021, we joined the Openscapes train through the mentorship process. And I wanted to spend some time thinking about our reasoning and why we decided to say yes to Openscapes. Open data is different than open science, and it's a natural transition. We're already, on the way to making our data sets open and accessible, and making the science that we do open and accessible is a natural next step. We were curious. I knew Julie before, in the before times as an undergrad, and connecting with her was really great. And I wanted to learn more about the Openscapes and all the awesome things that they're doing. We also, last year, the state board adopted a racial equity resolution. And we wanted to see how we can utilize the Openscapes process to operationalize equity, inclusion, and belonging into the work that we do, which, open science is kinder science, as we mentioned earlier. And so that can be a key part of that. And because there are so many different things that we're doing, different data sets, different partners, and now especially that we're all working remotely and not necessarily in offices anymore, we need to figure out more effective systems to support collaboration and partnership. And things like GitHub can help with that. And there are a number of water boards data-driven programs and partnerships that could benefit from operationalizing this sort of open science principles. So Corey and I participated as mentors, which really means that we helped Julie and Aaron do the awesome things that they do. So it was not a tremendously heavy lift for us. It was mostly, helping with the logistics and planning and preparation and taking notes and things like that. But we got so much more in return because we got to witness the conversations that the champions were having and really, be part of that learning ourselves. And these are the lessons, the take-home messages that we learned. There was a blog about it that Corey and I wrote, so I'm not going to dive deep. But the big thing here is that, again, it feels like doing open science can be lonely because, as Eli mentioned, there's individuals spread across the agencies that maybe don't know about each other yet, and it doesn't have to be. And as Ileana mentioned, onboarding can be really hard. And if we go through the Openscapes process, we can make it so much more than finding the bathroom on your first day, right? And really preparing people for success when they enter the agency or team or organization. And, acknowledging that going through the Openscapes process is an investment. It's not nothing. You have to dedicate that time to the meetings and the work in between the cohort calls and seaside chats, but it's, the return on investment, managers and executives like ROI, it's massive immediately for us and potentially in the long term for the entire agency. So our next steps, as we mentioned, Corey and I are going to try and bring Openscapes to the water boards. We're going to start small because it's not the only thing on our duty statements, but we're going to start with the team of early adopters in the surface water ambient monitoring program and test out the kinks and help build the approach guide, the Openscapes approach guide, so other people can kind of learn from our experience and potential mistakes and do better for themselves going forward. And we're all about iteration in OEMA, so we're gonna learn from it, reflect on it, and try it again. I don't know what that will look like, but it's what we do. And then hopefully, through iteration, more and more people kind of want to adopt Openscapes into their work and open science, and we'll be able to start building the resources to help support that, that drive. And so with that, I will stop there. And like I said, there's my email, and we love building partnerships. And also in my slides, there's some links like to the blog and to other documentation about open science at the water boards. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. We're so excited about everything you're doing and are so excited to see how you're able to do this at the water board.
It'd be great.
Thanks so much. Hey. Okay, well, we will now have our last speakers, Amy Steicher and Aaron Fries. And this is on about the top part of page 6 in the notes. So take it away, Aaron and Amy.
Awesome, thank you. So we're taking a little more of an informal approach and just kind of wanted to have a bit of a guided sort of discussion between Aaron and I. Also because Julie and Aaron, you already have done a lot of the work for us with all of your great presentations thus far at ESIP this week, in terms of kind of giving a little bit of background on some of the goals and vision for the NASA Openscapes effort. But first, for really quick background, so I don't have to completely repeat everything again, this effort that had started in the spring of 2021 is really aimed at supporting our research teams and our user communities as they migrate in particular, their data workflows to the cloud. So, NASA Earth Data is undergoing a very large effort to migrate data over. And there's a lot of questions, and it can be a scary new paradigm for everyone, including ourselves, kind of sitting on more of the user support end. And so we've developed this mentor community of DAC members. We've been having conversations about best teaching practices and where and how to train our users. What are we still having trouble understanding? Because again, we're kind of learning this together as well, in terms of what does cloud computing mean, and how can we, produce kind of more consistent guidelines and resources. And so as Aaron and I had brainstormed this a bit, we started to think about this in a couple of different ways and approaches. And so we just sort of outlined that in the Google Doc if you want to follow along to kind of how we're going to structure our little discussion here. But for those of you who aren't familiar, and I think it is really important to talk a bit about how we're structured. So acronym soup again, but the NASA Earth Observing System Data and Information System, NASA EOSDIS. Within that, we have 12 of these distributed active archive centers, or DACs, and both Eli and Anna sharing their organizational structure. I actually think that's important to some of this conversation. It's a really wonderful structure. We all sit at different data centers. Some of those are, within universities. Some of those are part of NASA centers. But it's a great structure in that we all represent and support different earth science disciplines. So obviously at NSIDC, snow and ice, focused on the cryosphere and the polar regions of the world, but it's more than that. And obviously with Aaron over at Land Processes. So it's really great in a lot of ways. We can really hone and have that unique knowledge and unique support in terms of those unique individual needs at those data centers. But you can imagine that at some level, some siloing can occur. And so that was some of our discussion in terms of how has this approach been different within our NASA Openscapes group, and why is this so successful? So anyway, that's a little bit of a background just to get us started. So as you could see in that outline, as we talked about, we kind of started to think about, all right, where are we at today? A little bit of a retrospective over these past few months, almost getting up to a year now, on this effort across these several DACs, as well as the NASA Impact group as well. So there's sort of hey, how has this been working and how are things changing within each of our individual data centers, our individual DACs? How are things happening, changing, looking, evolving across our kind of collective DAC bubble, across EOSDIS? And then, where are we seeing and where do we want to see this go in the future? Maybe some of these areas already in terms of expanding out beyond that bubble. So a little bit of an intro. So I wanted to kick things off, and I'll turn it over to you, Aaron, and maybe we can start at the kind of within DAC sort of infusion and what you've been observing and seeing at the Land Processes DAC.
Yeah, so I mean, the nice thing about being involved with Openscapes and having these activities like the hackathon and the AGU workshop is, we've been able to be in front of, virtually be in front of participants and get immediate feedback from them. From a LPDAC standpoint, I think really DACs across the board, we've been producing these kind of tutorials or educational materials for several years now. It's a good resource, and typically using kind of something like a Jupyter notebook. But usually it's kind of you make it, you put it out, your community gives you a thumbs up, and you don't really hear much about it afterward, whether it's working or if it really is kind of hitting the spot in your community. And so, the nice thing with Openscapes is we're getting that feedback. We're bringing that back to our DACs and being like, well, how can we fit this model that we're doing in Openscape? Do we need to break up things into smaller modules for specific tasks that you're doing with data? And how do we then kind of implement or coordinate with the Openscapes kind of repository so that we're not duplicating multiple kind of efforts. We don't have various copies of how to access data, how to search for data. We'll have a single kind of form, I guess, that you can kind of refer to. And so from a LPDAC standpoint, that's kind of what we're trying to do, is how do we make it so that we're across the DACs really trying to eliminate duplication, I guess.
Yeah, that's great, Aaron. Totally agree there. I think the other, another thing is we've been looking at this at the NSIDC end, is that we had actually been starting concurrently to form a dedicated, what we're calling like a data use and education team that's really focused on developing, materials, both for kind of live events and sort of, asynchronous sort of tutorials. And so it was just such a really great opportunity so that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and we have more confidence with some of the decisions and best practices that we've been developing within Openscapes, then say, oh yeah, let's take that collaboration document that we put together on Openscapes in terms of GitHub workflow. Let's use that to teach our new user support staff who are also new to GitHub, and how do we help to teach them and infuse them. Another piece that I think is interesting, and I'm actually thinking on the fly here with Eli's presentation from that sort of bottom up versus top down. And I think it's really interesting, Eli's kind of saying, hey, NASA Openscapes, this is very top down. It was funded, at the ESDIS level. And that's certainly true. But I feel like from kind of, maybe our management's perspective, at NSIDC, they're looking to us to help us better understand what open science means and to help develop our strategy, because we're in it and practicing it. So I think that's just been a really interesting observation. I feel light bulb that just went off as you've been talking. Okay, I want to move us forward. I feel like we only have a few more minutes. I haven't been keeping track of the time, so please cut me off, Julie. But moving into kind of the across DAC, and this is where we've been talking, Aaron and I, a bit about, what's different about this approach. Why has this been sticking more so than other kind of cross-DAC working group efforts in the past? So Aaron, if you want to start us off there with your thoughts.
Yeah, and I think I kind of can riff off of what you just said about our management being bought in, but not necessarily, directing every little piece of it. They've given us the latitude to really explore this space. And I think more than any other kind of cross DAC activity from kind of our perspective, the user perspective, this has been really the most successful one, because we've had the place to do this with regards to GitHub and having a 2I2C Jupyter Hub instance to do coding with each other and bounce ideas off each other. We've also, this is part of our job responsibilities right now. And so that's been one of the major differences and driving factors that I think has really made this activity successwe're what's nice is that now I have insights into what other DACs are doing, like truly we're peeking over the wall and saying, well, I wrote this script, and you wrote this one, where are the commonalities and how do we kind of bring it back together? And so it's been, I think, overall a fantastic opportunity to learn, not only personally, but then also take that, put it into our tutorials, or at least point my community to these resources that I didn't know about before this.
Yeah, that's great, Aaron. I feel like I don't have much to add on there. I think it's just the obvious pieces that we've all identified within our cohort in terms of, the dedicated time and resources. Having the leadership, I think, at the, with Aaron and Julie, to have almost that accountability and to keep having those standing meetings, the place and space is so key. So I think you hit on that collaborative environment to develop together, to ask questions together, and to build something together. Because again, that's not how we're structured. We have our own websites and our own unique places to add those materials. So this is really the first time we've had that opportunity to build something together and to keep growing, and to have the GitHub and Git collaboration structure that we've all agreed upon to help us iterate and continue to develop as a community. We're probably running out of time here. Maybe just a few notes or a few thoughts, Aaron, on the future, and kind of looking again, beyond just what we've been doing across EOS-DIS in terms of further collaboration with other organizations.
Yeah, so I mean, by no means are we like completely solidified in our framework. I mean, we're learning with each activity what works, what doesn't, how can we maybe organize things better, what other groups do we reach out to or try to kind of interact with to bring all these resources into maybe more of a common model or a common space, so that we don't have the ISAT hackathons and these other events that are going on that are doing similar activities, but they're all very disparate in kind of how they kind of approach the storage and distribution of their materials. And so we'll be, I think, kind of looking at that space and seeing how, or participating with those other groups to see how we start to bring all this into a common space. Something that I really look forward to. The mentees, I mean, bringing these projects in and helping them migrate to the cloud. I'm excited for that. It's going to be fun, but also, I mean, there's a lot, me as personally, I have to learn. So I mean, it's there's a lot of personal capacity building going on, but also the opportunities there are immense. And so we're trying to advocate for those activities as best that we can.
Yeah, I think maybe we have to end it there. I mean, my other just quick note on the thinking more broadly, and something again, thinking about what's been working here, what's unique. And thinking about these other collaboration opportunities that we've had, like as you mentioned with University of Washington E-Sciences and other structure, other frameworks for these kind of live events and hack weeks, is that we have different varied roles across this Openscapes cohort, this NASA cohort. It's not just user support. It's not just traditional software developers. It's a mix of everything, and scientists, real scientists, a part of our team, and we're all doing this together. And so there's different communities that we're tapping into across those roles that I think is going to also provide us more opportunities for collaboration in the future. All right, and our spiel. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity, Aaron and Julie.
So much. This is really super. So first, let's give a round of applause to our last speakers, to Aaron and Amy, and then to all of our speakers. And I wanted to, so now we have about 25 minutes to have a group discussion. And before we just launch in, I'd like to go ESIP style, and I'm going to put the notes doc here. And if on the top of page 7, we could just take a minute to just, what caught your ear? What did you notice? What are you taking away? What do you want to talk about more? And while you're doing that, one of the things I want to highlight is just how grateful we are for the management and leadership of all of the speakers that we had this morning. Particularly the NASA, the fact that this NASA project has a top-down component, but I think, like Amy said really eloquently, it's her management is looking to her for what open data and open science is, and so it has a grassroots element of it as well. But we're just thrilled that this is part of all of these speakers' jobs and that we're able to be part of it. Julie, anything else you want to add while people are reflecting?
Yeah, and just to echo Aaron, thank you. Thank you all so much to the speakers and to your management and bosses for helping this be part of your job. I think that that's something that's really important to us, is that open science is a lot of work, it's effort, it's worth it, but it's something that we're really excited to see as part of your jobs. And I think, and as you're writing your reflections here that we'll have in this sort of group discussion as we go forward, I also just wanted to give all of the speakers a chance to reflect and follow up any questions or things that caught your ear across the speakers, because I know, as we mentioned in the chat, this is one of the first sort of cross-agency Openscapes efforts, and so we've been working really deeply with each of these speaker groups, but not all of you know each other, so this is a really cool chance for you to to reflect or ask any follow-up from each other. So to put you on the spot even further, if you're interested in doing that, please go ahead and unmute.
Just following up on some conversations in the chat about getting, like, how do we plug in and how do we connect with Openscapes folks. I think it's so critical that we continue to stay connected among the different agencies, because we can really learn from each other. And one of the big takeaways that in OEMA we have, and also became very clear in Openscapes, is the data, the specific questions might differ. Maybe you're working on fish or COVID COVID or bugs in streams, but the data problems are generally pretty similar. And so being able to connect with folks from different agencies to learn from each other on a regular basis and kind of break down those silos, I think, is critical for the longevity of this movement.
If I may, as a community member, I just wanted to say thank you for this session. It's really hope inspiring, I guess, to see folks working across the different agencies. In my work, I'm mostly working with communities on just taking federally available open data sets and trying to make them answer real community questions like, hey, is this watershed okay for me to swim in? If not, what's in it and what's going to happen to me? And it's been a really, frankly, frustrating, but also interesting journey to try to say, okay, well, this is what's available. We can make our work open, but there's a lot of sort of cutting through really long technical documents and caveats, and then trying to stitch together databases. I mean, even just within one agency, it's a lot to stitch together, but then what you really want is to be able to go across all the different agencies and say, okay, well, like NASA has this amazing satellite imagery from which they're able to derive information about conditions that is so much more complete than just looking at what permit there was for someone to put something in the water, that sort of thing. So it's really cool to see this, and I'm curious how folks like me can plug into this community a bit more and sort of hear and maybe bring perspective to it.
Yeah, Kelsey, I mean, I think we're looking for mentor types. So really, I think ESIP is a community that's rich with people who have this capacity to help research teams understand how to use data. So that would be my first thought. Maybe just opening up the floor. What else was interesting to people, or questions that you have?
I'm getting distracted, like responding to everything on the Google sheet and then in the chat. And this is sort of one of those things where you have like a Google Doc going on and there's like this intense conversation happening there and everybody's quiet in the video.
Eli, though, do you want to voice some of the things you've posted a lot of great follow-up in the chat? I don't know if you want to verbalize any of it around equity across centers or
yeah.
other points.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll speak a little bit to like kind of the equity, some of the things I'm thinking about regarding equity, and that can mean a lot of different things. And when I said it in the talk, I was thinking about like equity in terms of like number of, say, early adopters within a center, the amount of support that your center might give you, the amount of restrictions that your center imposes on you. When I say center, just think about wherever you're located. I mean, this is really typical for organizations. And then federal organizations, they're these big, huge sprawling things. But like, I think it's really, what I'm recognizing now is the importance of sort of people who are more privileged in different ways to kind of give cover for others and help others do things. So like in my case, a lot of the early adopters are junior in my agency. Not all at all. That's definitely not the case. But there are many that are junior, and so that it can be hard for them to be able to devote the time to change how they're doing things. And they may be in a situation where their supervisor doesn't think that doing that is a good thing for them to do. So I have to think about, how I can support that person. Like what can I do, and sort of putting myself in the shoes of their supervisor and kind of thinking about like what might convince that supervisor, or how can I sort of set up this thing that this junior person can be a part of so that their supervisor thinks that this is a good thing for them to be doing, that it's somehow like a gold star for that junior person, or it's kind of prestigious or something. And as a scientist, I think about those things and I'm like, oh, for God's sake, that's not really relevant. Come on, let's get in there and do the science and the coding. But I have to work on that myself, because those social things are really important, and they make the difference with success. And also like an issue about equity, I think for where I work is like some centers are richer than others. Richer in terms of richer, that's not, no, that you're thinking about money. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that in terms of like our support or from IT, but really it's the lack of barriers. I'll give you just one example. So if you're familiar with GitHub, you'll understand this story a little better. So like at my center, we can just use GitHub. I can just create GitHub organizations to organize all my work, and we just like jump in there, and we have to, there are restrictions about putting like confidential data up, of course. I mean, like we have to think about that, but otherwise, like, yeah, we're kind of, it's not that we're encouraged, it's that we're not discouraged. And so we just kind of do whatever we want. And then through Openscapes, we started to work with some scientists at another science center. And they were like, wait a second, but there are all these rules you have to follow before you do that. And then Alaska, I think Alaska is the same too. We're like, why? Why do you have those rules? Yeah, but we have to do this, and we have all these naming conventions, and we can't have public or private. We have to, everything is, we can't have, there's just all these rules. And we're like, that was like 5 years ago. They're like, that's not, and that was made by people who don't even do science. They're like, no. And they're like, wait, I can't believe what you guys are doing, and we can't do that. So that's kind of an example where like they're not able to innovate, or they weren't. It's changing for them because now they can point to like, hey, look at why are you restricting us? But the problem is they can't innovate. Because so what Aaron was talking about, where you open up the box and you can see what the other teams are doing, it's like putting gasoline on the innovation, right? And if you're in a group where you're closed, you can't see outside of what you're doing, it's like you got fire retardant on all your work.
Thanks, Eli. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat as well. I see Anna's got her hand up, and please, raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or we'll go through more questions in the doc afterwards. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And just kind of to build off of what Eli was saying, and also there was a question in a document about just wanting more clarification on what the heck is open science. And I think it's, at least from my perspective, the people and the tribes and the groups that I work with aren't necessarily all GitHub lovers, or they're not going to look at the code, right? And so I think a really key part of open science is documenting, the data sets and the things you put on GitHub, but also, merging in science communication and including, less technical, meaning coding forms of describing what the heck it means and how things should be used and how it can benefit, communities or organizations like Kelsey mentioned earlier. And so for me, open science is this nexus of open data, science communication, and equity, right? And equity meaning specifically like racial equity and environmental justice. And I think if you can kind of get all of those things together, then you're really doing like the purest of pure open science. And it's hard to do all those things because of all of the rules that people mentioned. We experienced that too with the water boards. Like we might have Zoom or Microsoft Teams, but like we can't create a new team in Microsoft Teams or a group like you can in Slack, right? So like there are barriers like that I think every organization and group experiences, and it's finding out ways to work through those issues. And I think that's why the Openscapes process is so valuable, is because yes, you can talk about GitHub and coding and R and all of the fun, fancy things that you can make with those open tools, but it's also making space to have the conversations of, these are our barriers, and how do we, as a community, as a team, work through them? And I think a lot of times it's hard for people to give that mental space for themselves to spend time thinking about that. It's more just like, I got to get this done. I got to meet this deadline, and trying to just do the work, right? Anyway, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Anna. That was one, people really like your definition. And I think that last point about the investment in time of having to slow down a little bit to speed up is something that we certainly observe with the teams we work with. So I put the year of open science in the title of this session as partly as maybe a hook to get some people here. And I think maybe this is the time to talk about what we would like to see in a year of open science in 2023. There's been some notes in the chat. NASA has designated 2023 as their year of open science. But what would be your blue sky hopes for that year? What would we do? Doug, I see you're unmuted. I'm hoping you're going to talk.
I have some thoughts, maybe not on the like NASA or, you know, like federal agency level or anything like that, but in my mind, kind of this journey to open science, like we now have a lot of these tools that are accessible, or that they're made. Like, you know, before you didn't know how to get that information, but now we have that information and there are amazing resources, like everything that the Openscapes group has provided and is available online. And for me, the kind of year of open science looks like getting that into the right hands, and providing that information in accessible ways to the people that need it. Because now we have this open science, you know, principles and documentation, and now it's about making sure everyone is able to see that and potentially adopt that into their routines and workflows. And so that's kind of my hopes for open sciences, getting these awesome resources that are now created into the right hands for people to use.
If I can throw out another thought, I think part of what I would want to see was one of the points that Amy raised, which is how do we empower people, get the sort of senior level management backing for this kind of transformation that TOPS implies. And it relates to the comment that I made earlier, which is using this as a vehicle to learn from those of us who have a history, as well as from those who are not constrained by that history. All of us need to walk forward together, and I think this can be an important catalyst because it does have, at least in my NASA world, such high level backing.
Alexi.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that there's been a lot of great conversation about, you know, the technical barriers to open science, sort of overcoming those, you know, learning how to use the relevant tools. I think one shift that I would also like to see is sort of a shift in the entire academic enterprise, if you will, in terms of things like incentive structures and funding models for this. I mean, I think that right now we sort of contribute to open science projects largely sort of like despite progressing on all of our regular research interests. And I think that all of the funding models, all of the ways that we traditionally recognize scientific contributions, et cetera, are all like very competitive, very siloed. And I have no idea how to change that. But that's something that I would like to see more focus on. And I think that to some extent, that's like some of the actually regulatory push for open science requirements, I think will help to change that. I mean, so I mentioned SPD 41, which is NASA's big new policy around how all NASA funded research will have to follow open science principles moving forward. Is pretty rigorous and comprehensive in doing this. And that, you know, these kinds of open science ideas will be used in evaluations of NASA proposals in the future. But I think that there will be a big cultural shift that needs to happen towards recognizing the value of like contributing to open source projects as much as, you know, writing papers and things like that.
100%. I think that's spot on. I think it's just a step in that direction, but I put a link in the chat to the National Academies Roundtable on aligning incentives for open science, which they brought together presidents of universities to try to move that forward. But what we know is it's the mutual reinforcement of groups like us with presidents coming together that all of this change happens. Katie. You are muted. We can't hear you. Maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. And can you see me? This Zoom thing, so teams ingrained. Anyway, I'm just, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Katie Baines. I'm from NASA headquarters, so I've been getting a lot of lip service here, but I do want to just echo what everybody has said is, you know, we understand the challenges, we are ready to fight them, or at least make some headway on them over, and when, you know, I've heard several people say that there is support from higher up. I'm actually Kevin Murphy's, well, I guess, pseudo deputy. I don't know what I am, but I work in Earth Science Data Systems, and I just want to sort of double down on the NASA commitment to supporting these efforts over the next 5 years. And we have some exciting stuff coming up. I wish Shell Gentman was here to talk a little bit more. She is a wonderful advocate for the TOPS in the Year of Open Science activity. But one of the things that we're really dedicated to is expanding this training outside of what Openscapes have been doing into, you know, developing curriculum, certifications. We have a whole bunch of, you know, KPIs. We're taking this really seriously. So I just wanted to sort of, you know, be that voice here in the room to say, I'm listening, I'm happy to be here, and go y'all. And we want to do it all in the open, and to inspire people like Eli, I guess. So thanks. And I'm glad to have virtually heard you talk, and your passion, it comes through and it excites me. So yay. All right, that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, Katie. Anna.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of circle back to Doug's, I believe it was Doug's comment about how might we get executives and managers on board with this whole thing, especially for those that maybe, you know, haven't looked at data in decades, and that's just not their role, right? And some things that we've been doing at the water boards, we've dedicated time and resources to data literacy training for executives and managers, not to say this is how you use GitHub and R, but these tools exist and here's how you can support your staff. And by doing that, you know, it is an investment in, you know, learning and training on that part, but, you know, instead of spending weeks, you know, doing quality control on data sets, it can take minutes. And so you can really, and showing use cases of staff that are the early adopters and how they're highly productive and highly efficient and doing really great work to support and lead the mission of the agency. That's how we're doing it. You know, some people are not gonna jump on board the open science train, and that's okay. You know, we wish they would, but trying to reach folks where they are and communicate with folks where they are and connecting to their needs and their goals as individuals and leaders, that's the approach that we're taking at the water boards. And it's slow. You know, I wish that everyone would be like, yeah, GitHub all day, every day, but they're not, right? And so that's just the approach that we're taking. Hopefully that helps provide examples for that question.
Super. Eli, maybe a last word. You're muted.
Yeah, sort of following up what Anna was talking about for, you know, how to talk to leadership. And I didn't talk about that I didn't get to that, but also I will say that my thinking on that is evolving, but I have learned a lot by kind of studying this diffusion of innovation theory, and especially ideas about sort of quote unquote crossing the gap, and why going from the early adopters to the majority can be a hard transition to make. And one of the things that I've kind of realized, and it's a hard realization, is that like the things that really excite me about open science and my enthusiasm about that can actually backfire, and that I need to really change my messaging, and I need to better understand what motivations of leadership are, and be cognizant that I am not accidentally sort of pushing buttons So like, I'll just give you a concrete example. So like they're concerned, like supervisors care about the time of their staff and how their staff are spending their time. And some of them kind of highly regulate the time of the scientist in their team. Not all of them. This is not all of them, but some of them do. So like when I get really excited and, I'm like, oh, this cool, technology. I mean, they're smart. They know that some of those early adopters in their group, they will go down a rabbit hole and jump on that and, maybe get on board of something that's going to take a lot of their time and not help them with the task at hand, which is, hey, you got to get that report out. You got a big deadline. I do not want you wasting your time on this thing that's not going to help you. So figuring out how to change the messaging so I don't sort of push that button. And then secondly, like one concrete thing I really want to do is working on the success stories and how to craft those success stories so that it convinces them that yes, putting the time into this really is going to help people do that report. And part of it is that there are success stories happening in teams, but until we can kind of pull back that cover and allow teams to see what other teams are doing, there's no way to know about it, right? So like maybe a team in the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, they have a really complex report and they have a whole like repository that integrates the data and the text and updates everything so that when they update the data, they just press the button and it generates their 300 report with all the figures updated. They just saved so many hours of staff time. Right?
Yeah.
And they have that, but nobody else knows about it. So
yeah,
that's
so I think I hear that as a great, also a vision for 2023 of sharing, bringing these to light and sharing these stories. So I want to give Julie the last 1 minute to wrap up our call and be conscious of your time. Julie, take it away.
Yes, thanks so much, everybody. This has been such a phenomenal session. We really appreciate all of your contributions. And so this is at some final notes on the top of page 10. Here's 3 ways to stay involved with Openscapes through our newsletter, following us on Twitter, and we also have an open call for the NASA Champions program if there's research teams that are using NASA data and wanting to transition to the cloud. We also like to end with an efficiency tip and an inclusion tip of the day. So an efficiency tip of the day is when you're watching YouTube, you can press the L key on your keyboard and that will jump ahead 10 seconds. The J key will rewind 10 seconds. So when you're rewatching ESIP videos, you can do that. And then an inclusion tip of the day is something we've learned from the Better Allies newsletter and Twitter account. And one way that you can be a better ally to folks is to ask questions to help other people reflect on their language or their statements. So you can practice this by saying, what makes you say that? Or sometimes the most appropriate thing is saying, ouch, if something just doesn't sound right, just to give that some space for reflection. So thank you all so much. It looks like there's a coffee break now and we can let you go off there, and thank you all so much.